You know, they say if you've been married long enough, you start to pick up on all the little things. A twitch of the eye, a different tone of voice, a glance that lingers just a bit too long. I never thought I'd be the kind of guy to worry about that kind of stuff, especially not after 17 years. We'd been together so long, it felt like we knew each other better than we knew ourselves. But one night, something happened that I just couldn't ignore. Her name was Darla. We met back in college, her in her final year studying interior design and me, well, I was just trying to figure out what to do with my life. She had this fire, this spark, and the way she talked about her dreams and ambitions pulled me in like nothing else. For 17 years, we'd built a life together, 2 kids, a nice house, the whole deal. I thought I'd hit the marriage jackpot. So, when things started to feel off, I told myself I was being paranoid. It was probably stress, maybe work, maybe the kids. But every day, something was nagging at me, like a voice that wouldn't go quiet, no matter how much I wanted to ignore it. Darla started coming home later than usual, saying her new boss, Garrett, was pushing deadlines and adding more hours. I'd heard of Garrett. He had a reputation around town for being an ambitious, cutthroat type. He was intense, Darla said, but she seemed almost admiring when she talked about him. That should have set off alarms, but I brushed it aside. One night, she was especially late. Midnight came and went, and she still wasn't home. I remember sitting on the edge of our bed, staring at my phone, wondering if I should call. Just as I was about to dial, a text came through, "Sorry, babe, lost track of time. Late night at the office with Garrett and some clients. Go to bed without me." Something about it didn't sit right. I mean, Darla never lost track of time. She was organized to a fault, always on top of things. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was nothing. Maybe I was just overthinking things. A few days later, we were at a neighborhood barbecue hosted by a guy named Luther, one of those old-school types who swore by charcoal grills and homemade everything. Luther and his wife Marva were good people, the type you'd invite over for drinks and end up talking to until the small hours. Darla and I went, like we always did, and everything seemed normal. But at one point, Darla wandered off, and I found her across the yard talking to someone I hadn't seen before. He was tall, dark hair slicked back, wearing an expensive leather jacket that seemed out of place at a backyard party. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but they were laughing together, looking close. I walked over, feeling this odd urge to break up whatever was going on. "Hey, everything okay over here?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. Darla's eyes darted to me, and for just a second, I thought I saw guilt flash across her face. But she quickly smiled, introducing me to the stranger. "Adam, this is Valen," she said, gesturing toward him. "He's a client from work. I didn't expect to see him here." Valen reached out to shake my hand, and there was something about his grip, the way he looked at me, that felt off. Too strong, too knowing, like he was testing me. "Nice to meet you," he said, his voice smooth. "Darla's told me so much about you." That shouldn't have bothered me. She'd worked with plenty of clients before, and sometimes they became friends. But the way he said it, like there was a secret in his words, sent a chill down my spine. After that night, things between us started to feel strained. Darla was more distant, distracted. When I asked her about it, she'd brush it off, blaming work. But it wasn't just work, she'd take her phone everywhere, even into the bathroom, which she'd never done before. One morning, when she'd left for an early meeting, I saw her phone light up with a message from Valen. "Last night was unforgettable. Let's make it happen again soon." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach as I stared at that message. Part of me wanted to smash the phone right there, but I couldn't do it. Instead, I slid it back to where it had been and went about my day, pretending nothing had changed. But inside, I knew this was the start of something that would change everything. After seeing that text from Valen, I felt like I was in a bad dream. The kind where everything around you feels wrong, but you can't wake up. I'd always trusted Darla, I never had a reason not to. But suddenly, my mind was racing with questions I didn't want to answer. The next few days, I tried to act normal. Every time I looked at her, though, I couldn't help but wonder if she was thinking about him. I wanted to confront her right then, but something held me back. What if I was wrong? What if it was all a misunderstanding? But deep down, I knew I wasn't imagining things. Then, just a few days later, my suspicions got worse. I was in the garage, sorting through some old boxes when my phone buzzed. I pulled it out, half expecting it to be one of the kids asking for a ride or a friend inviting me over for a beer. But it wasn't either. It was a text from an unknown number. "Hey, Adam. You don't know me, but I think we need to talk. It's about your wife." My heart skipped a beat. I stared at the message, rereading it over and over. Who the hell was texting me about Darla? And what could they possibly know? My mind ran wild with possibilities, each one worse than the last. After a few minutes, I finally responded, "Who is this?" The reply came almost instantly, "Name's Roscoe. I'm a friend of Valen. Let's just say I know more than I'd like to. Are you free to meet?" I didn't know anyone named Roscoe, but I knew that name sounded familiar. Darla had mentioned it in passing once, talking about some networking event. She'd said he was a character, a bit shady but with connections everywhere. I felt a surge of anger rising up. What business did this guy have getting involved in my marriage? "What do you want?" I typed, trying to keep my cool. Roscoe's reply made my blood run cold. "I think it's more about what you need. Let's meet. There's a diner off Route 9. Tonight at 7. I didn't respond, and for the rest of the day, I couldn't focus on anything. I went through the motions, work, errands, even dinner with the kids, but my mind was completely elsewhere. I couldn't shake the feeling that Roscoe knew something that could tear my life apart. 7 o'clock couldn't come fast enough. When it finally did, I told Darla I needed to run a few errands and drove out to the diner. The place was dimly lit, with neon lights that flickered over chipped tables. I spotted a man sitting alone in a booth near the back. He looked exactly how I'd imagined someone named Roscoe might look, scruffy, with a worn leather jacket and an air of someone who'd seen too much. I walked over, and he glanced up, motioning for me to sit. "Adam, right?" he said, his voice low and gravelly. I nodded, trying to keep my nerves in check. "You said you had something to tell me about my wife." He leaned back, crossing his arms as he studied me. "Look, man, I don't like getting in the middle of people's lives, but Valen's my friend. He talks, you know." I clenched my fists under the table, fighting the urge to snap. "Just get to the point, Roscoe. What are you trying to say?" He sighed, scratching his stubble. "Valen, he's seeing your wife. They've been meeting up, you know, on the side. He didn't exactly keep it a secret, bragged about it a few times when he'd had too many drinks. I thought it was all talk, but," he paused, giving me a look that was half pity, half guilt. "Then I started seeing her with him. Out in public, at parties, private dinners. He made a point of showing her off." It felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. I tried to keep my expression steady, but inside, my mind was a whirlwind. "You're telling me Darla's involved with him?" The words barely came out. Roscoe nodded, his face grim. "Look, man, I'm sorry. I know it's not easy to hear. But I figured you'd want to know." For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the table, my thoughts racing. Images of Darla, smiling, laughing, telling me she loved me, flashed through my mind, mixed with the gut-wrenching reality of what Roscoe was saying. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my voice shaking. "If Valen's your friend, why would you betray him like this?" Roscoe shrugged. "He's my friend, but even I have my limits. He's playing with fire, treating people like they're disposable. I'm not cool with that. I've seen what affairs can do to families, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone. I took a deep breath, trying to process everything. What do you want me to do with this information? He looked at me, his eyes hard. That's up to you. But I'd confront her. Ask her straight up. She might lie, but you'll get a read on her. Trust me. I sat there for a few minutes after Roscoe left, my mind reeling. Part of me wanted to believe he was lying, that this was some cruel joke, but the evidence was piling up. I knew I had to confront Darla, to get the truth straight from her. When I got home, the house was quiet. Darla was in the living room, scrolling through her phone, looking as casual as ever. But I could feel the anger boiling inside me, stronger than ever. The urge to confront her, to demand answers, was overwhelming. But I also knew I needed a plan. I couldn't just storm in, throwing accusations. I needed proof. I took a deep breath, deciding that for now, I'd keep this to myself. I'd start paying closer attention, looking for any sign that Roscoe was right. And when the time came, I'd confront her. But for the first time in 17 years, I felt like a stranger in my own home, sitting across from a woman I thought I knew, but now wasn't so sure. The days following my meeting with Roscoe were some of the hardest I'd ever lived through. Every time I looked at Darla, every smile, every laugh felt like it had a shadow behind it. I found myself becoming paranoid, looking over her shoulder when she was on her phone, analyzing every late night, every extra work meeting. She had a habit of glancing over her shoulder before answering calls, and that, combined with the constant buzzing of her phone, made my skin crawl. To get any clarity, I knew I needed to catch her in the act. After spending days on edge, I decided to take a drastic step, hiring a private investigator. I reached out to a guy named Brigham, an old-school detective with a reputation for being discreet and effective. We met in his downtown office, walls lined with cases solved and pictures of him shaking hands with satisfied clients. Brigham listened to my story with a quiet sympathy and nodded slowly. "I can get the truth for you, Adam. But remember, you need to be ready for it," he warned, his voice steady. "Sometimes the truth changes everything." I nodded, willing to do whatever it took to know. Brigham set his plan in motion, shadowing Darla's every move, from her office to her supposed late-night meetings. A week later, Brigham called me in. I walked into his office with my heart pounding. He laid out photos of Darla at a fancy bar with Valen, her hand resting on his arm, laughter on her lips as they sat close, oblivious to the world. Seeing her so open, so carefree with him, it felt like a punch to the gut. Brigham sighed. "This is just the start, Adam. I'll keep digging, but you might want to consider confronting her soon." But I wasn't ready yet. I needed more, to see it for myself. Over the next few days, Brigham continued to send updates. Every photo chipped away at my heart, each one showing Darla's affection for Valen as they flirted, touched, and lingered together. I went through our shared memories, trying to pinpoint where things had changed. When had she decided I wasn't enough? The anger simmered, but I held it in. I had to wait for the right moment. I needed someone to talk to, someone I could trust. I reached out to Clyde, my best friend since childhood. He listened, his eyes widening as I explained everything. "I never liked Valen," he said, his voice low. "There was something off about him. Look, if you need help, anything at all, I'm here." Clyde's support was a lifeline, grounding me in the storm. Together, we plotted a confrontation, debating the best way to approach Darla and demand the truth. Finally, I couldn't wait any longer. One night, after dinner, I sat Darla down. My heart raced as I looked her in the eyes and said, "Darla, are you cheating on me?" Her face went pale, and she stammered, caught off guard. But instead of denying it, her shoulders slumped. "I didn't want you to find out like this, Adam," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. But there was no remorse, no regret. Just a defeated acceptance. She admitted to the affair with Valen, saying she hadn't felt alive in years, and Valen gave her the thrill she missed. It was as if the last 17 years had been erased with her words. Darla's confession shattered me. The rage, the betrayal, the disbelief, it all came pouring out. I couldn't hold back as I demanded answers. Why had she done it? What had changed? She dodged some questions, saying she was sorry, but even then, I could tell she was holding back. It was clear that she wasn't just cheating, she was gone in spirit long before I'd noticed. And maybe, somewhere deep inside, she blamed me for not seeing it sooner. After Darla's confession, the news of our unraveling marriage seemed to seep through our circle of friends, like ink spilled on paper. Some of our friends didn't even wait for explanations. I started noticing sidelong glances at gatherings, hesitant nods from people I'd known for years. A few mutual friends, like Penelope and her husband Jethro, tried to straddle the line, sending cautious messages of support that only left me feeling more isolated. Darla, meanwhile, didn't seem fazed by the fallout. She continued with her routine as if nothing had changed, even meeting with Valen openly in places where people knew us. One evening, I got a call from Marva, Luther's wife, the same Luther who'd thrown that neighborhood barbecue where I first saw Darla with Valen. Marva's voice was hesitant but gentle. "Adam," she began slowly, "I just want you to know that we're here for you." I never thought she'd do something like this. Her tone was raw with compassion, and the kindness in her words only made the betrayal cut deeper. I realized that I was losing not only my wife but the life and friendships I'd carefully built for nearly 2 decades. The anger that had been simmering inside me finally reached a boiling point. I decided I needed to confront Valen directly, to face the man who had stolen the woman I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with. I tracked him down to a popular local bar where he often hung out, one I had intentionally avoided until now. Clyde insisted on coming with me, knowing full well that I might do something I'd regret if left alone. When I walked in, I spotted Valen almost immediately. He was in the back, laughing with a few people I didn't recognize. But as soon as I approached, he fell silent. He met my gaze without a hint of remorse, his smile fading into a look of cold amusement. It was like he enjoyed the power he held over my life. "Why her, Valen?" I demanded, my voice barely steady. "What do you get out of destroying everything we built?" He leaned back casually, taking a slow sip of his drink before responding. "It's not personal, Adam," he said, shrugging. "Darla's different with me. Maybe you just didn't know how to keep her happy." I clenched my fists, feeling Clyde's hand on my shoulder, a silent reminder to keep my temper in check. Valen's words were like daggers, each one cutting a little deeper. I wanted to punch him, to wipe that smug smile off his face, but instead, I took a deep breath and stepped back. "This isn't over," I said, barely managing to keep my voice steady. "You've taken everything from me. Don't think you'll walk away unscathed." Valen just laughed, dismissing me as if I were an insect he could flick away. Walking out of that bar, I realized that confronting him hadn't given me the closure I'd hoped for. If anything, it had only deepened my resolve to get through this stronger than ever. One morning, as I was trying to piece together my thoughts, I got an unexpected message from a former co-worker of Darla's named Harlan. We hadn't spoken in years, but he'd heard about our situation through mutual friends. Harlan asked to meet, saying he had something important to share. I agreed, curious and desperate for any insight. When we met, Harlan looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat. Finally, he broke the silence. "I probably should have told you this sooner, Adam, but Darla and Valen, they've been close for longer than you think." There were rumors around the office, little signs here and there. I didn't want to believe it at first, but looking back, it all makes sense. Harlan revealed that Darla had started spending time with Valen over a year ago, long before her late nights and missed dinners. Their business dinners were often private, away from clients and other coworkers. They had even taken trips under the guise of work conferences that weren't on the official calendar. It was clear that their relationship had been growing under my nose for much longer than I'd realized. The news hit me like a tidal wave. This wasn't a spontaneous affair, it was calculated, planned. Darla had led a double life, smiling at me every morning while spending her nights with him. Harlan's revelations gave me the final push I needed to let go of the person I thought she was. I'd been avoiding real conversations with my kids during this ordeal, not wanting to taint their memories of our family with my own pain. But after Harlan's revelation, I realized that hiding the truth wasn't protecting anyone, it was only prolonging the inevitable. One evening, I sat them down, my heart heavy with the weight of what I was about to tell them. I explained, in the simplest terms I could, that their mom and I were going through a hard time, that things might change, and that it wasn't their fault. My daughter, Rena, looked at me with wide, questioning eyes. She was old enough to understand, but too young to fully process it. My son, Callan, a bit older and sharper, asked the tough questions. "Is this because of Mom's new friend?" he asked, his voice small and pained. It turned out he'd overheard more than we thought, catching glimpses of late-night phone calls and quiet arguments. As painful as it was, sharing the truth with them was strangely liberating. They deserved honesty, a chance to prepare for the changes ahead. And as we sat there, I promised myself that I would be the stability they needed, no matter what happened with Darla. The weeks that followed were filled with meetings with lawyers, discussions about custody, and hard choices about finances. Darla and I were civil, but every conversation was laced with tension. She tried to maintain an air of regret, but it was clear she had no intention of leaving Valen. One night, after the kids were in bed, Darla and I sat down to finalize the details of our separation. "I never wanted this to happen, Adam," she said, her voice wavering. "But things change. People change." I looked at her, trying to see the woman I'd once loved, but she felt like a stranger. "You didn't just change, Darla. You chose this. You chose him over us." My voice was calm, but the hurt was evident. She didn't respond, just looked away. In that moment, I realized that I was finally ready to let her go, to release the pain and anger that had held me captive. I wasn't the man she wanted anymore, but I was still a father, still a man with dignity and self-respect. And that was enough. Months later, after the dust had settled and the legal battles were behind us, I found myself in a new apartment. It wasn't the house we built together, but it was mine. I'd decorated it with my kids in mind, setting up spaces for them to feel at home. Clyde, my loyal friend, helped me move in, cracking jokes and keeping the mood light. The friendships that had survived this ordeal felt stronger than ever. One evening, as I was unpacking, I came across an old photo of Darla and me on our wedding day. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness, a sense of loss for the life we'd once shared. But it was just that, a moment. I placed the photo in a box, deciding it belonged to the past. Life slowly took on a new rhythm. I focused on my kids, my career, and rebuilding the parts of myself that had been fractured. The pain wasn't gone, but it was no longer overwhelming. In its place was a quiet determination, a promise to myself that I would build a new life filled with honesty, loyalty, and love, on my own terms. As I looked around my new home, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. I was free. And for the first time, I was ready to embrace whatever the future held.